Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's nice to see so many people here. My name is Max Smith. I'm a tutor in French at Queen's College, and my research concerns urban culture and urban art. And I'm going to give a talk this evening called The Icon, the Exile, about Dante and Italian street art. So if by some miracle you have been to Italy in the past 2 years, you might have encountered street art like this. I took these pictures on a trip to Florence and Ravenna in 2019, and this is just a small sample of the Dante street art that I saw, which raises the question of why street artists would be interested in Dante. Street artists have a reputation for being countercultural, creating art that borders on vandalism. Their work is deliberately not made to last, so why do so many of them dedicate works to a 700-year-old ultra-canonical artist who sought to create work that would last forever? Well, the affinity is not as odd as it might seem at first. Dante is, in his own way, an urban artist. His visions of hell, purgatory, and paradise are clearly shaped by the form of the medieval city. Inferno is basically a narrative of two people strolling through a very hot city, stopping to discuss the striking images they see in its streets. And read very liberally, it's not that different from a modern street art tour. Dante also encounters graffiti in the literal sense, as in an image engraved in the wall, a graffito, on the Terrace of Pride in Purgatory, where he sees God's wall carvings. And Dante is closely identified with cities, not just Florence, but also Rome, Ravenna, Verona, and the other cities he passed through during his exile. So artists who take a city as their canvas potentially have a lot to learn from Dante. Of course, Dante means different things to different people. And this evening, I'd like to discuss two visions of Dante that emerge in Italian street art. They are, as you can guess from the title, Dante, the national icon, and Dante, the exile. And these two perspectives reflect two sources of tension. The first, a tension in Italy over what Dante means and what uses it's appropriate to put his image to, and a second in street art over where the movement fits in the art world and how much it should resist the embrace of art institutions, municipal governments, and tourism boards. So let's start with Dante, the national icon. This version of Dante is really shaped by the legacy of the Risorgimento period in the 19th century. That is when Italian nationalists were pushing for independence and reunification for the country. Nationalists tried to identify icons that could form the basis for a shared Italian culture and that could transcend local and regional identities. And Dante was one of the biggest figures instrumentalized in this way. They promoted myths that Dante was the inventor of the Italian language and the founder of Italian literature. And artists played an important role in the nationalist movement by creating Dante iconography. Statues of Dante like these appeared in cities all over the country, including Florence, Verona, and Naples. Places were renamed after him, and portrait exhibitions were organized. So street art does not tend to be nationalistic in the same way that public sculptures do, but much of it borrows from Risorgimento-era iconography and is totally capable of participating in the soft power instrumentalization of Dante. Street art representing Dante shows up wherever his name and image adorn street signs, statues, monuments, and mugs. And this picture on the left is taken on a snack stand next to the Duomo in Florence. It's there wherever Frommers would tell you to go looking for his traces. And most of the images that you find in those places don't really have a critical message. Instead, they operate a bit like a blue plaque, alerting you that this site once had a famous visitor. And street art can also find itself closely allied to institutional interests. I mean, you might think of street art as vandalism, but in recent years it has gone more and more mainstream. And a growing number of artists work with permits. Many municipal governments see street art as a marker of local vitality. As a famous Banksy tag says, if graffiti changed anything, it would be illegal. Well, now that it's not really illegal, its dissident bona fides have to be re-examined. So these questions of institutionalization and soft power politics for both Dante and street art converged in an exhibition that ran for 6 years in Ravenna called Dante Plus 700. It was organized by the owner of a local art gallery stroke skateboard shop, and it brought together hundreds of Italian artists, many of them street artists, around the theme of Dante's face. The show was co-sponsored by the Ravenna government, and the organizer wrote in his program notes of Dante's power, quote, "As a man, as a poet, and especially as a brand, synonym of that made in Italy excellence that is always a source of envy for the whole world." The show was provocatively hosted at the Casa di Oriani Library in Ravenna, which was founded by Mussolini as a fascist archive. And Mussolini intended this library only a few feet from Dante's tomb to connect the fascist movement to Dante's dream of a restored Roman Empire. The people involved with the exhibition tried to distance themselves from the fascist history of the site, but the location nevertheless shows that there's a continuity between 19th and 20th century appropriations of Dante for political movements and what's happening today. So the street artists participating in this show faced an especially difficult challenge. In this institutionalist, nationalist context, how do you create work that's defiant, countercultural, and local? Well, one piece in particular from the 2017 edition stands out. It's by a group called Collettivo FX, and it shows Dante lying prone on the side of a cargo train. The text in German and Italian says, "Warning, he doesn't have papers." It's part of a series the artist did in response to the European migrant crisis that began in 2014. Riding on a cargo train was and is a way for migrants arriving in one EU country to cross into another, from Italy to Germany, for example, before applying for asylum. The group also produced mock travel posters advertising tickets from Addis Ababa to Nuremberg starting at 5,200 euros. Each leg of the journey was listed with a mortality rate, 83% for the Libyan desert crossing. In this piece, the salient fact about Dante is not his connection to a specific place, like Ravenna or Italy, or to Italian culture. It is instead his exile, which is reimagined as a kind of refugee status. The artists moved their work out of the gallery, out of the street, and even out of the city. And in the process, they moved Dante away from a nationalist or metropolitan cultural politics. This Dante is stateless. The text component of the work is in German and Italian, and the train car wears Deutsche Bahn livery, making clear that Dante will not be staying in Italy and suggesting that he is not truly welcome there anyway. So this is an example of street art that privileges Dante the exile over Dante the national icon, and there are others. This mural was created by students at the Liceo Artistico di Ravenna, and it shows Dante and Galla Placidia, the exiled founder of Ravenna's San Giovanni Evangelista Basilica, accompanying a family of Africans on their journey across the Mediterranean. The text comes from Dante's tomb, and it says, "Since my soul left to be a guest in better places." This bittersweet line confronts Italians with the model of those cities that welcomed Dante and the lesson of those that failed to. The better places evokes the hope of refugees seeking hospitality, and it's also a reminder of the large number who die in transit. This work by Sirante turns Gustave Doré's illustration for Canto 14 of Inferno into a commentary on the decision to launch the 2018 Giro d'Italia bicycle race from Jerusalem. The title of the piece is a play on the 3 girone, or rings, that make up the 7th circle of hell. The pilgrim and Virgil watch from the hillside as outsiders, while Palestinian demonstrators hurl projectiles over the heads of the cyclists towards an Israeli flag. Dante, in this image, isn't personally among refugees, but questions of hospitality, statelessness, and displacement are clearly at its forefront. And I'll end with this piece by M. Fulcro, showing Dante in handcuffs. This is an example of how these two versions of Dante overlap. M. Fulcro is a street artist in the transgressive tradition. He's somebody who works without permits, risking fines and arrest with every poster he creates. And he said that that made him identify with Dante the exile. For him, Dante represents the artist whose work displeases the authorities and who suffers because of it, but who carries on creating. But when asked to summarize the message of this work, he said that it symbolizes how Italian culture is repressed by the authorities. Dante in handcuffs stands for Italian art in handcuffs. And so while this Dante is in exile, he is also a national icon. This contradictory image in which Dante represents both Italian culture and that which is excluded from it captures something of the diverse significations that have been ascribed to this poet over the past 7 centuries, and also something of the unstable position of urban art at this moment, caught between its transgressive origins and its growing acceptance by the mainstream. There's much more to say about Dante and street art, and I'd be happy to talk more about any of this outside the lecture theater, but for now, I hope this talk has given you some idea of what these images mean for the next time you are wandering Italian streets and encounter one in the middle of your path. Thank you.